If you don't know what direction you came from in life, you really don't know what direction to take in life. And I don't want to see nobody take the path that I went through in life, spending majority of your life in prison for nothing.
I was recently invited to Alabama for a screening of the film Just Mercy, which is a really inspiring telling of the work of lawyer and activist Bryan Stevenson.
And I'm gonna do everything possible to keep them from taking it. You don't know what you're into down here in Alabama when you're guilty from the moment you're born.
God.
Mr. McMillan.
We done here.
Now, of course, we all know the United States has a dark history with racial injustice, and a lot of artists and storytellers try to make it their goal to tell the stories about people who heroically stand up to fight that injustice. However, this experience in Montgomery went far beyond a film screening and gave me an unexpected glimpse into how some people are choosing to acknowledge this history and move forward. We are in Montgomery, Alabama. This is the Alabama River. This is a riverboat. I'm about to go back to the hotel, hit the hay, so I can get ready for a conversation tomorrow with Bryan Stevenson. For every 9 people executed, 1 person on death row has been exonerated. Bryan Stevenson's human rights organization, the Equal Justice Initiative, works to educate the public on this extremely high error rate and prove the innocence of those wrongfully convicted. I had the pleasure of talking to Mr. Stevenson and Anthony Ray Hinton, a man forced to spend 30 years on death row before EJI proved his innocence.
Thank you, Jesus! Thank you, Lord!
Mr. Hinton, sorry, I love your shoes, by the way. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you felt knowing that the EJI and Mr. Stevenson were coming to work on your case while you were on death row.
For the first time I felt that I had someone that was going to fight for me. Mm-hmm. And that's all I ever wanted, was someone to fight. I like to say that ever since 2005, I call it a marriage made in heaven. And he did exactly what he said he was going to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thankful that God brought him into my life. And as you know, we sit here today because of what he did.
Absolutely.
I want you to know there is a God. He sit high, but he looks low.
There's so much to say when we deal with these racial injustices in this country. I feel sometimes it can be overwhelming to focus the voice and get through your clear message. Do you have any advice about how to really kind of like boil down and focus and find that passion and speak that truth?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really important question because there's so much out there today, and I think social media has been great, but it's created a lot of noise, and it's very full, and you can kind of get lost in all the multiple conversations. And I do think it makes sense to spend time and just kind of think about what's important, what are the priorities. Mr. Hinton talks about when we met, and of course when we met, we had a clear focus, which was to get him off of death row, get him out of prison, and that sharpened what we were talking about, what we think about. If we keep our eyes on the prize, we've got work to do to end over incarceration, to eliminate excessive punishment, to create just societies, healthier communities. And there are different lanes we can follow, but we can't be distracted. We can't lose sight of what we're trying to achieve.
To see another way Bryan is trying to achieve this awareness in Montgomery, we went to EJI's National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a 6-acre site that shows the names of thousands of racial terror lynching victims through hundreds of monuments, reminders of our dark past meant to inspire visitors of all backgrounds to take meaningful action against racial injustice today. I'm finding right now we're at this place in the country where everything seems so divided between red and blue states and conservative and liberals. How would you go about kind of like bridging that gap of ideas?
Yeah, well, I do think we have to care more about persuasion. I don't think it's enough to say, this is my truth, I'm standing here and I'm just going to assert it. Because you have to be privileged and entitled to not care about moving other people from where they have to be. I mean, I represent people who are really vulnerable. My clients will be executed unless I persuade someone to recognize the wrongfulness of their conviction or their sentence. I represent children who've been condemned to die in prison, and they will die in prison unless I persuade others to recognize the wrongfulness of putting children in those spaces. And I do worry that sometimes we're not thinking about how we reach people who are in different places to see the things that we need them to see. It's easier to just say what we want to say, but it's not effective. Dr. King knew that he couldn't achieve civil rights unless he got institutions that had resisted civil rights for generations to think differently about his witness. And what was so powerful is that he brought this nation to an understanding that they wouldn't willingly embrace, but they had to kind of be forced to embrace. And I think we have to understand our obligations to think critically about what's persuasive. That's where film and art and narrative work is so important. We change the world when we allow the ideas in our mind to be fueled by the conviction in our heart. And it's the hearts of young people of the next generation that matters most to me, because that's what will motivate us to do the hard things that have to be done.
I'm from New York, but my family is from the South, so I was able to see, you know, Wilcox County, Alabama, where my dad's family is from, and Northumberland County in Virginia, where my mom's family is from, and kind of see how many people were lynched. You know, it's part of my history, so this whole process has been very emotional.
Oh, I can imagine, and I'm so grateful to hear you say that, because we built this space in part for families to come back and reclaim their spaces. And sometimes you see family members and they see their family name and they just wrap their arms around these spaces. And it is emotional because we've been forced to be silent. We haven't had the space to talk honestly about this truth. The beautiful thing is that there's a power when you know your history, because people endured, and the strength of their capacity to resist and to endure and to struggle is something we need to remember as we deal with these issues today.
Absolutely. Montgomery's willingness to be upfront about their history isn't limited to EJI's memorials or the Legacy Museum, but can be seen nearly everywhere you turn.
We're at Court Square. This is where slaves were brought to be auctioned off. It wasn't, I guess, this fountain, but there was a fountain where they could water themselves and water the animals. Then the building over there is where they would receive their compensation, which was only like food and grain, and probably very little of that. The thing about Montgomery that I think is really important that I don't think we see in other states is they're taking responsibility for everything that happened here, right? We have this idea of never forget, but we don't talk about that really so much when we talk about slavery and racial injustice in this country. So I think the rest of the country can really look to Montgomery, Alabama, which is something I'm sure people never thought they would say, but they can look at it now and really see that we're taking onus, is that the word, of the situation. And I appreciate that.
While filming these signs and sculptures, a man named Foote approached us, excited to share a detailed history of Montgomery and explain why this knowledge is important to move forward.
I actually did a bid in prison. I had a bunkmate from Little Rock, Arkansas, a white guy that was a grade A Ku Klux Klanman. He made a statement to me one day, said the way white people keep things from blacks is they put it on paper. So I took an interest in learning history. Everything that I learned about Alabama, Georgia, Florida history since I've been out of prison. This is what I use out here on these streets to support myself and my family. If a person understands what our forefather and mother went through back in the day, it'll wake them up on all the crime that's going around. Montgomery has took a real change. You see a lot of black on white relationships around here. It's a lot of white people that stay in these apartments. They come bring hot coffee to me or just sit down and give me a word of encouragement to keep pressing on and not go back to my old lifestyle or the life of crime. It's totally different.
We're not claiming to understand the full complexities of Montgomery's race relation, but everywhere I went in Montgomery, I seemed to be confronted by warmth and communal understanding of the past that's hard to describe. While walking in front of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s church, my crew and I were invited inside by a lovely woman named Miss Brenda, and she too was excited to share all she knew about the history of the city.
This whole thing, it's been a trip.
City's not the same. Where have you been today?
Can you imagine getting in that? That would suck. So I've been back in New York for a little bit now, and I just felt like I wanted to kind of summarize how I felt about that trip. So New York likes to fancy itself as the liberal epicenter of the world, but I think what we do a really bad job at doing is really acknowledging our history. Right now we're standing in Central Park, and there used to be an African-American settlement called Seneca Village here that when they made the park, they completely wiped out. Most people don't know about this village, right? But this was a place where people had homes, they had businesses. This was a thriving community, and it's completely gone. We struggle with racism. New York struggles with sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anything, right? Like any other place in the world.
We spoke about New York racial justice initiatives with Christopher Paul Harris, who co-curated an exhibition on Black Lives for Activists New York at the Museum of the City of New York. On top of agreeing that all communities can do more to recognize their past injustices, he also feels it's important for the city to highlight moments of triumph.
New York and other places like New York can do a better job of historicizing major events and celebrating them. So like Juneteenth, for example, which for a lot of Black folks is a celebratory moment. That is the day in June 19th, where some Black people learned for the first time that they were free. New York can take a moment to make that a citywide holiday. The belief that something better is possible should galvanize all of us to do what we can where we are to make things a little bit better.
Never let your fear stop you from doing something that makes you uncomfortable. In fact, when you feel uncomfortable, you're probably going to do your best work.
Absolutely. That's where growth happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.